Well, now we'll carry on with the High Renaissance by entering part 2. And we'll begin this second chapter of the presentation by looking at Raphael. We just finished with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, two very unique and gifted artists. Unlike these two artists, Raphael was gregarious and loved by all. He must have had a great personality. He was a diplomat as well as an artist. And so he had many friends. He spent most of his artistic career actually working for the Vatican, which is where he was a diplomat. He had a gracious personality and a noble bearing, and with this he came to be considered a sort of artistic royalty. He's best known for his sweet depictions of the Madonna, as we see here, but here's some other of his work. As he matured, his paintings took on a different quality. The portrait to the left shows something in the sitter, something of the pain of life, really. And he's done a masterful job of capturing this dignity and this real sort of a softness. The one on the right is just kind of an odd painting. It's a painting of Pope Leo X. And it's very unusual for him because he was usually pretty sunny. But here the Pope appears to be taken with a thought and distracted as he turns a page, and the two other figures aren't really relating to him at all. They all look a little suspect. And this was actually painted shortly before the death of Raphael. Now, if you look at this as just a capturing of an image in time, it's just a weird configuration. Instead, you could consider all of the time that it would take for him to recreate this scene in a painting. One of Raphael's best-known paintings is the School of Athens. With this painting, he went directly back to the roots of the Renaissance in classical Rome and Greece. We have Aristotle and Plato represented here this is Aristotle as Leonardo da Vinci. All of these other artists of the day in Florence are also depicted as people from the great classical era. Here's Michelangelo. And the only figure that's looking out, you'd have to look at a larger version, right here is Raphael, looking straight out at the viewer. So with this painting, Raphael really tipped his hat to the roots of the Renaissance, which means rebirth of classical thinking. And this painting addresses that directly. Let's just look at a few of his drawings because he was such a master draftsman. Well, let's leave Raphael behind and look at paintings of the common people. This man on the left is by Ghirlandaio. He has kind of a nose condition, something wrong with his skin. And actually, this was painted after his death. He put with the grandchild with him, kind of a post-mortem painting honoring this elder. And the painting on the right by Giorgione, it says, the old woman is holding a note in her hand, and all it says is, with time. So that's referring to that theory that we see throughout the Renaissance, that life on earth is precious and someday we will all pass on. Hey, let's go to Venice, okay? This is Bellini, and he came from Venice. His father, Jacopo Bellini, was also an important painting teacher. His brother-in-law was the artist Mantegna, but Bellini has a very unique and sort of a grandiose style. Here we have on the left is an altarpiece, and on the right is a portrait of a doge, or a man of great standing in the community. I like this guy's clothes. Wow, what a dresser. All right, so moving on, this is Titian. He's another artist from the Venetian school. Titian studied with Bellini, and he eventually became the official painter of Venice. This painting above is interesting to me. It's called Sacred and Profane Love. And it represents that theme between good and evil. See, we have the cherub is about his business. You can't see very well, but there's little bunnies back here, which have a lot of kids. And this woman, as she's making her choice, does she go off in the world, or does she go settle at home and raise a lot of bunnies, so to speak? So there is another version of how the Renaissance artists went back to the myths of Greece. And somewhat Rome, but primarily Greece. Hey, so let's look at one of the many fathers of modern art. This is a guy named El Greco. And El Greco means the Greek, but you know he was working in Spain at the time. A lot of his work has this sort of an odd coloration and very high drama that was unusual for its time. And not many people loved his work. Well, he was well known, but he was controversial. And yet, now he's considered truly one of the fathers of modern art. Now, speaking of controversial and strange, what about Harmonius Bosch? Bosch was, now we're going to Northern Europe, by the way. Bosch was an artist that had if you can look closely here, let's see, there's kind of a fish boat with people in it. There's a lot of stuff happening with strawberries. There's this kind of a tower thing here. His work's just weird. And actually, sometimes it's a little, shall we say, risque. So it was collected. It was highly collected, but it would be presented in the back room. In the textbook, they have more of the detail of the Garden of Earthly Delights, or I encourage you to look up online and really study this piece in detail, because I got to say, it's just one of the weirdest paintings I've ever seen. And it's so crazy that he was doing this during the Renaissance, when we were seeing so many more traditional kind of paintings. So let's carry on our look at the Common People by Pieter Bruegel. Bruegel was in Belgium, was where he lived, and he specialized in depicting not the very wealthy or the priests, the high people in the Catholic Church. No, he represented the common people, either with a sort of a fondness, or often he used humor in his work. This one actually is called Netherlandish Proverbs, and it's actually a lot of people sort of having a hard time. It's almost like a morality painting. But if you look, all these people are working. There's somebody with a ball and chain. I think they just killed a goat right here. And a pig. This is a whole butcher place. I mean, it's a little bit of an odd one. Here's one more. This is called The Harvesters, and it looks like lunchtime. Look, they're all just kind of napping out. But what's fun about Bruegel's work is that you really get a glimpse into what daily life might have been in the 1500s. That's one of the things that I really love about studying art and studying history. We can consider how human beings actually lived and created, expressed their creativity, even though it was over 500 years ago. Let's talk about another great artist, Albrecht Dürer. Now, he was from Nuremberg, Germany, and his father was a goldsmith. So he learned to carve metal early on. But he was an artist, truly. And he went off to Florence and Rome and was inspired. And he came back to Germany and he did something revolutionary, which was that he developed art prints on a mass-produced scale. He became best known for this printmaking, and he also became quite wealthy. Beginning with Dürer, we have the opportunity to make multiple copies of one image. So when these were offered for sale, they were less expensive. So with Dürer, we have the middle class participating much more fully in art. And they can, so collecting became something for the merchant class as well as for the very wealthy. And speaking of wealthy, Dürer became quite wealthy in his lifetime. He was also one of the first artists to use watercolor in painting. And here's some of his beautiful watercolors. I gotta say, I love these. Look at the little cow's nose. I mean, who would think about it, except an artist who was looking at the world with that great detail. This is called Section of Turf, and there are many of them. And this one, well, we were just talking about bunnies, but in this case, I believe he called it a hare. So, finally, we'll end our presentation with one of a very famous drawing that's in many people's homes, or in many people's grandmother's houses. Okay, it was in my grandmother's house. It's called Praying Hands. and it's one of Albrecht Dürer's most famous works. Now this one is a drawing rather than a print. It's done with silver point, which means something like a pencil, but it's a very soft silver. And then he also uses white chalk. There's something about this image that has related to people on a very deep level ever since he first did it in the 1500s. And on the left, we have his 4 apostles that are part of an altarpiece. And these are life-size. They're gigantic. So in studying these pieces, we can see the great diversity of this artist. And with Albrecht Dürer, that brings our exploration of some of the many artists of the High Renaissance to a close. Thanks for listening.